and the accuracy.
A highly integrative effort by the Navy and Sandia led to the Mark IV, a smaller, lighter-weight, rad-hardened reentry body, which would become the most numerous of any nuclear weapon type deployed. And the C-4 missile would achieve a throw weight comparable to that of the Air Force's Minuteman III. But the Navy's nuclear mission remained unchanged, driven largely by the limitations of accuracy.
The system served the same purposes as on the Poseidon.
To destroy urban industrial targets through defenses.
So the development of longer range systems, in fact, becomes an enabler for much greater flexibility in terms of patrol area, greater flexibility in terms of target coverage.
So you combine the greater sea room with greater accuracy, and you have a more capable system to target the enemy.
As Trident I was ready to fulfill the Navy's nuclear mission, national policy was evolving in a new direction, different from that served by sea-based forces directed at large urban industrial targets. A nuclear targeting policy review, prepared for the Carter administration, warned of the construction of deep underground shelters in the Moscow area.
Evidence that the Soviet Union was planning to try to survive a nuclear war, ride out a nuclear war, with hardened bunkers for the command, with the deployment of the new systems with hard target kill capability. All of this pointed to a very worrying kind of image.
The Soviets continue to develop and deploy strategic offensive nuclear forces.
Part of the Reagan campaign was to convince the Congress that this is what's going on. We never took that seriously. You couldn't. But what we did conclude is that at least psychologically, it was not acceptable to continue when the Soviets had this huge SS-18 with 10 warheads, and the best we could do was a Minuteman with 3 warheads.
Right at that time, we believed that the Russians were achieving an ability to take out, with very high yield, very high precision warheads, missiles and warheads, to be able to take out our ICBM force.
Accuracies are being achieved on ICBMs. That meant that ICBMs were losing some of their credibility as a highly survivable basing.
And we were going through the throes of a national, almost a crisis within the Department of Defense on how we were going to make that force survivable.
We said we have to deploy the MX, or Peacekeeper, and the first thing we'll do is just put it in silos, and then we will look for alternative deployments. But that is not a stabilizing system. We're putting that in because we do have to repair parity between the forces.
We needed to develop and deploy weapon systems based upon considerations of what the other side would be prepared to do. You cannot simply say we will deter without being able to execute in wartime.
We then had a significant breakthrough with the deployment of the Trident II missile. Because Trident II missile had both throw weight and accuracy.
What we did with D5, Mark V, was to create a peacekeeper-like capability as part of the seaborne strategic deterrent.
The W-88 Mark V system, what it provides is a significant increase in accuracy, and that's resulted from the D5 missile and also from the integrated arming, fusing, and firing system that Sandy and the Navy worked together to develop.
It became capable of engaging essentially any interesting target. So with the high-yield W-88 warhead, the Trident II forced the Navy into thinking beyond the notions of counter-value.
Rather than a deterrent which was mainly based on large area targets, we could focus more on striking the military capability.
On balance, it was decided to go with a higher yield system to be able to hold at risk those targets in the Soviet Union that were of very high concern to us.
And so the maneuverability of quiet submarines was a guarantee, really a very high quality guarantee of a survivable system that couldn't be targeted.
In the mid-1980s, nuclear deterrence was best served by the strategically stable and survivable Trident II D5 missile system, the development of which would prompt design decisions at the nexus of always and never.
There was the tension between getting a high yield in the W-88 because of the concern for being able to hold at risk very hard targets in the Soviet Union. Tension between that and the use of insensitive high explosive.
Explosives used in the weapon's primary that were less detonable in an accident. During the late 1960s, nuclear weapon accidents over Spain and Greenland raised international concerns about the dispersal of plutonium resulting from detonation of the bomb's high explosive. By 1970, weapon designers began to revisit what had been an old idea of developing an explosive for use in nuclear weapons that was less sensitive. But insensitive high explosive would come with design costs, added weight, and greater volume.
At the labs, it became a principal theme of weapon design during the late 70s and early 80s. When I moved to the Pentagon in 1981, I took it as a little crusade on my part to embed in the practices, regulations, thinking of the Pentagon, the importance of IHE.
During Mark V development, there was a consideration. Designs around conventional HE and those involving insensitive HE. The designs at the time identified significant packaging impact.
We had a very unique missile system in which a third stage extended up through the post-boost vehicle deck, and the way we deployed warheads was in a fairly narrow annular ring around that third stage. During the Cold War, we wanted to get the maximum yield in the minimum size and weight package.
We couldn't have gotten the capability that was needed for the mission out of the Mark V unless we went with CHE, conventional high explosive.
The use of conventional high explosive, requiring less volume, would enable a lighter, high-yield reentry body, with a base diameter conforming to the space available on the D5's through-deck configuration.
Conventional HE was insensitive enough to meet their standards for nuclear safety and to allow them also to meet their operational goals within an optimized design.
I decided that reliability of the design outweighed the need for IHE. I also required the Navy to do a very extensive study of the handling of nuclear weapons in their custody.
We basically went through the strategic weapons facilities with a fine-tooth comb to look at every phase of how the weapon was handled and looked at what could we do to improve the environment. And I believe it was the thoroughness of that safety study that was the final deciding factor.
Rapid development and testing of Trident II followed, the pace of which rivaled its predecessors, Poseidon and Polaris. By late 1989, the Trident II missile system was nearing its initial operational capability. At the same time, dramatic political changes were unfolding in Europe with the fall of the Berlin Wall the prelude to German reunification, and the unilateral withdrawal of Soviet forces from Eastern Europe, and a U.S.-Soviet summit yielding agreement on bilateral reductions in conventional forces. These events would spawn major unilateral reductions in U.S. nuclear forces, beginning with the de-alerting of the Strategic Bomber Force. In this time frame, the safety of several U.S. nuclear weapon systems came under congressional scrutiny.
Professor Sid Drell, he and Johnny Foster co-chaired a review committee on safety and security of nuclear weapons, IHE, and with some focus on the W-88.
We ended up focusing on the probability that if the missile fell over, would the propellant stage that maneuvered the reentry vehicles, would that deflagrate, maybe even lead to a detonation?
An accident where the missile flops down, we didn't see that they had met the 1-point safety criterion with confidence, based upon the analysis they had done then.
And so then, since these concerns were raised, they tasked the Navy to do a study and to report back to the Drell panel, and they looked at the design of the missile, design of the warhead, and logistics and handling operations.
And we proved the experimental and calculational pedigree of our estimates of missile safety.
And to make a long story short, chatting with the folks from Sandia, they had performed the calculations, and those hydrodynamic calculations satisfied the experimental data.
The added safety you bought by using insensitive high explosive still with detonable propellant was seen to be minimal.
I had an opportunity to brief Drell and Townsend and others down at Swift Land, and I believe their conclusions well after the study that it was a lot safer than they had anticipated in the beginning.
Safe, secure, and reliable. And that was job one, and we weren't going to waver from that.
There's always a balance between the surety and safety features and the usability of the weapon. You can make the weapon so safe and so secure that you would have trouble using it in wartime if you had to.
So the question is, in order to assure against or never, are you willing to sacrifice always? It's always a trade-off.
More than 20 years have passed since the military requirements, the always and the never of a nuclear weapons system, were deliberated upon in response to an emerging threat environment. The world continues to change. We are living in a new threat environment, one that now includes terrorists with nuclear ambitions.
The context for national security changed after the Berlin Wall fell in 1989. The September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks further altered our perception of the threat. And our nation's national security strategy is evolving to respond to new challenges. For more than 65 years, the U.S. nuclear security enterprise has met the nation's defense priorities. From the urgencies of a world at war in 1945 to the imperatives of the Cold War that followed. From the beginning, nuclear readiness and use control were of paramount importance. After a string of airborne accidents, nuclear safety increased in priority. And later, when U.S.-Soviet relations descended to their lowest point, new nuclear offensive capabilities were deployed. Throughout this history, the men and women of the Department of Energy and its national laboratories, Los Alamos, Lawrence Livermore, and Sandia, along with the Department of Defense, have assured the safety, security, and effectiveness of U.S. nuclear weapons. This is a proud legacy and an ongoing endeavor to which all remain committed, maintaining an appropriate balance of always and never to sustain a credible nuclear deterrent.